Hello and welcome to Projector, and on this episode, Aardman goes back to the time of early man for the origins of football. Doug, voiced by Redmayne, is part of a fumbling tribe of cavemen who make their home in a peaceful valley led by Timothy Spall's Chief Bobnar, but they're forced out into the Badlands by the arrival of Lord Nuth, voiced by Tom Hiddleston, the ruler of a nearby Bronze Age city who has taken over the valley for its ore. Doug challenges Nuth to a football game over the face of the land, but these cavemen are going to need some serious training, including from Maisie Williams' Gooner, if they're going to take on the champions, a real Bronzio. I absolutely adore the work of Bristol-based Aardman Animation. I think their work is truly extraordinary, and like many people my age, I grew up watching their shorts, and I think they very much captured my imagination at the time, and I think a big reason why I'm so into film as much as I am is because of their work. And when you think of stop motion, chances are you're probably thinking of Aardman. Yeah, they've had a few forays into the realm of CGI animation with Flushed Away and more successfully After Christmas, but for the most part, stop motion is their bread and butter. They're still best known for their work on Wallace and Gromit, which is only fitting then because their latest, Early Man, comes from Wallace and Gromit co-creator Nick Park. And Early Man marks Park's first solo directing credit. Park has helmed films for Aardman before, notably Chicken Run and Curse of the Were-Rabbit, but they were co-director credits, and this is first in the director's chair in over a decade. Park in more recent years had stepped back into a producing position. Although that said, Park had been working on Early Man since at least 2010, and you can very much tell that this is a passion project for him because his fingerprints are literally all over it. One of Aardman's greatest assets is their world building. They're really great at putting their craft on screen. As someone who loves stop motion animation, part of the appeal for me is seeing real tangible objects on screen seemingly coming to life of their own accord. There's a real magic to that, especially because they're so small in reality, but if you put a camera in there, suddenly everything takes on this huge, epic expanse, and Early Man really used that to its fullest potential. There's a lot about the film that's very traditionally Aardman, especially in terms of the character designs with the big eyes and the huge toothy mouths, but there's other things like the fact that you can see the fingerprints in the plaster scene. That's always been something that Aardman has tried to keep in, and it's one of the reasons that their movies are so charming and so beloved, is that they have this kind of homemade feel to them. That's why they've never tried to get rid of that detail. It reminds you constantly that this is the work of many, many animators going through this very time-consuming, intensive process, but the results are hugely rewarding. It very much leans into the features of stop-motion animation and the telltale sort of ticks that sort of process has, and it's genuinely endearing to see on screen. It's why I go and see Aardman's work. And while there have been CGI accentuations, like notably flames, and a lot of the backdrops here are actually CGI mats, a lot of the film was animated against green screens, it reminds you throughout the film that everything about the movie, everything about the world has been created from scratch. You can tell that everything in the movie has been handpicked, handcrafted, and meticulously designed for every detail. Everything is exactly so. And the film rewards you for nursing that detail as per usual for Aardman, because it's absolutely littered with background jokes. There are puns and references and sight gags and little sly asides all waiting to be unearthed, and you might catch some of this on your first viewing and maybe the corner of your eye, but of course the movie's moving so fast and it's so dense that it's waiting to be picked up on repeat viewings. And that just shows the commitment that Aardman makes to everything. They make their creations feel so fully realised and inhabited They also have a lot of fun with the time frame and concept of the movie, because there's a lot of jokes about inventions, sort of spins on what we have in the modern day, but how given a Bronze or Stone Age spin on it. For example, there's an early scene where the chief is shaving and he uses a beetle to shave off the hair, like an electric razor, the little claws snipping away the hair. That is a phenomenal level of detail. That must have been ridiculous, trying to simulate those little hairs being cut off. But I think my personal favourite is the messenger bird. There's a running gag throughout the movie where they take this idea of a carrier pigeon, but the pigeon reenacts the message being told to it, almost like a video message as done by a theatrical actor. It's such a bizarre, absurdist concept, but it's a brilliant gag, and it's especially a great showcase for comedian and impressionist Rob Brydon, who has several roles throughout the film, but here he spends a lot of his time impersonating Miriam Margolyes, who voices the Queen, and there's something really quite brilliant about seeing this tiny pigeon suddenly take on this very violent, assertive side and grabbing people by the nose or lobbing fruit at people. It's a really wonderful concept. I wouldn't have minded actually seeing that joke come back a couple more times with other characters and doing a few more spins on it, but they use that joke fairly sparingly, but it's a really inspired joke, and there's plenty in Early Man that feels genuinely quite inventive, it has to be said. I really liked a lot of the jokes here, and the film just keeps them coming. Yeah, a couple of them drop like stones on occasion, but the sheer quantity means that you'll be very easily entertained all throughout the running time. Aardman have always been very proudly British. That's part of their appeal, but that has caused problems when they've worked for big studios like DreamWorks or Sony, who I think wanted something a bit more homogenised and easily marketable, and in doing so, you're losing some of Aardman's identity. Early Man is funded by Studio Canal, and you can very much tell that they're relieved at not having to be pressured for a big American studio, because in doing so, Aardman have created what is probably their most British movie to date, especially in the fact the plot centres around football. Not American football, I mean soccer football. To the point where I would actually describe this movie as being a sports film in disguise. It's not really been hugely emphasised in the marketing, but it very much is a major focus of the movie. The whole third act is the football game between the Bronze Age and the Stone Age. Everything builds up towards that. It's a real challenge for the animators. I can imagine this being incredibly daunting, having to animate all these players around the field and moving the ball around in this giant stadium. I do have to admit there were points in this movie where I was wondering how exactly it would play to an international audience, especially an American one who may be less familiar with football/soccer than we are. There's some very localised jokes towards the end of the movie, for instance, particularly the commentators, who are impersonations of John Motson and Alan Hansen, and both those impersonations provided by Rob Brydon, so that's 3 different roles he has in the movie. And I suspect that that's a joke that will fly over 99% of the American audience, unless they're very familiar with the sport. For the most part, though, the film plays so broadly with football that I think that most will be able to make a fair pass at it. You don't have to be an expert in the sport to pick up the obvious jokes about the fact that Real Bronzio is clearly meant to be a parody of a Premier League or a Champions League team that is full of puffed up, overpaid, egotistical stars. That's very obvious in the text. And there's a lot of fairly great visual jokes that means that even if you don't catch a certain reference, I think that they'll be able to tickle you elsewhere. There's a great visual gag involving action replays, or at least this version of it, where they're reenacted by puppets. again, that is used quite well in the movie, and it goes in some various different directions. It's quite cleverly used. And there's some fun little montages where the tribe are learning how to adapt to the sports, but in these very hostile conditions. So they're practicing their dribbling in the middle of a volcano. It's those sorts of visual jokes. So I think, for the most part, aside from the odd one or two jokes, I don't think that's really going to be too much of a problem. In terms of the voice work, there's one very obvious standout, and that's Tom Hiddleston as the villainous, greedy Lord Nuth, who is the ruler of the Bronze Age city and is utterly obsessed with bronze and wants to accumulate as much of it as he can. And he is hysterical in this movie. He puts on this broad comedy French accent. Every line he delivers in this gets a laugh. He is so funny in this movie. It's a side of Hiddleston that we really haven't seen before. And he is clearly having a ball of a time playing this larger-than-life, borderline pantomime villain. It's clear there is no way he could play this character over the top, and he just revels in getting to be as hammy as he can, and then some. Quite literally, because his best scene is a sequence where, through a convoluted set of circumstances, Doug's animal sidekick, Hognob, voiced by Nick Park, with a little streak of grommet in him, ends up having to masseuse Nuth in the bath. This scene is really quite hilarious. It's all about Hiddleston's performance as he's completely oblivious to what's going on while this extended set piece plays out. And it's even funny when you realise that apparently while they were doing the voice recordings for this scene, Nick Park was actually masseusing Hiddleston's back to get the proper sound effects. Think about that while you're watching that scene. But he steals the show pretty much. He is just nibbling away at all of Aardman's sets. Elsewhere, Eddie Redmayne voices our main character Doug with a lot of energy and enthusiasm because that's what the character requires. And that's kind of the problem I had with the character of Doug, and it's an issue that goes through the rest of the movie, in that there isn't really a lot to that character aside from that enthusiasm that drives the character and drives the plot. There isn't a lot else there to him, and Redmayne doesn't really add anything other than what's required to that role. Not to say that his voice performance is bad or that he's out of place, but his performance is very much dominated over by Hiddleston's. You've also got Maisie Williams as Guna, who is this Bronze Age teenager who's extremely good at football, knows the sport very well, and she's the one that teaches the tribe how to play. And she voices the role again in a vague kind of European accent that almost makes her virtually unrecognisable. I liked the character and I liked her vocal performance, but again, there's not really very much to that role, it has to be said. Elsewhere, you've got Timothy Spall as the leader of the tribe, who's very unambitious, and he very much is very stuck in his ways and, you know, a little bit jaded and cynical. And Spall is re-teaming with Aardman. He previously was a voice in Chicken Run, and it's always great to have Spall in a movie. He's always great value, and he knows his way around a punchline, and there's quite a few little asides from Spall, especially during things like the training montage, that manage to raise a chuckle, and he's very well cast in the role. And in general, this movie has an excellent cast. I've already mentioned that Rob Brydon is all throughout this movie. He's got a fourth role as one of the players on Real Bronzio named Gonad. But in the tribe, you've also got Johnny Vegas as Asbo. Yes, another British joke. You've got the likes of Richard Ayoade as another tribesman. Kayvan Novak plays the referee in the Bronze Age city, who is Noose right-hand man. There's all sorts of great voiceover talent all throughout this movie, and again, they all kind of get a little line or two that really makes you laugh and chuckle. And that's probably my biggest issue with the movie, in terms of the script, this is probably among the least substantial things that Aardman have done, because there's less focus on story or characterization than there is gags. But even so, that's not really meant as a slight. It's merely representative of the fact that even Aardman's weaker outings are still better than some studios' very best work. And so, even if it doesn't reach the heady heights of, say, the Hammer horror influenced Curse of the Were-Rabbit, or the silent cinema homage of Shaun the Sheep the movie, Early Man is still very, very entertaining, and it's still incredibly funny in places. It has some really spellbinding animation, it has to be said, all the way through it, and there is a level of invention still to be found here, and I really enjoyed watching this movie. It has a really good-hearted, really infectious spirit that leaves you with a smile on your face. Is it something that will probably stick around in your memory? Maybe not as much as some of Aardman's other films, but that's more in retrospect. While I was watching this movie, I was still having a really great time, and for that reason, it comes recommended. Early Man is another charming and hugely entertaining animation from the team at Aardman, even if it's one of their weaker films because of its relatively slim story. As usual, the animation is absolutely superb, keeping their traditional handmade style, but it's perhaps their most ambitious to date given all the sporting action. And you can see the dedication in every frame, not least because of their signature background jokes that reward repeat viewing. Arguably their most British film to date because of the emphasis on football, and some of the references may not travel, but it plays so broadly to still be accessible. Out of the voice cast, it's Tom Hiddleston who steals the film with his greedy, hammy villain, and the film keeps the gags fast and funny so it absolutely breezes by. It may not be as inspired as their best work, but it still hits the back of the net. If you like this review, then you can pass the ball over to my Patreon, where you can see my reviews early among other perks. But until next time, I'm Matthew Buck, fading out.